Lyra Vance didn't crave attention. At 26, she preferred tombs to people, curse-breaking to conversation, and solitude to anything resembling society. While other former Ravenclaws from her year at Hogwarts chased ministry promotions or lectured at magical universities, Lyra wandered across continents, unearthing lost spells and forgotten stories buried in stone and time. Her name barely appeared in magical newspapers, unless you read the credits on research papers. Even then, she was usually just L. Vance, independent consultant. She liked it that way. Lyra had inherited her mother's steel-grey eyes and her father's old wand, oak 12 inches, rigid. She kept her hair tied back, her robes practical, her satchel enchanted to hold 5 times its size. There was always ink on her fingers, dust on her boots, and a spell forming in the back of her mind. She was sharp, precise, and fiercely logical until she wasn't, because there were moments when her magic moved faster than her mind, when she could feel a curse before it was triggered, when her wand flicked on its own, redirecting spells she hadn't consciously aimed. Magic was supposed to follow intent. Lyra's magic sometimes moved on instinct. She never told anyone. Not when it first happened at 13. Not when it saved her partner's life in Morocco. Not when it nearly destroyed a temple wall in Delphi. She chalked it up to intuition, to overactive magic, to anything but what it truly was, something ancient, something waiting. She arrived in Egypt alone, hired by a private collector with a forgotten tomb and too much money. "Just open the outer ward," he'd said. "The rest is for show." But when she reached the site, a sunken temple half swallowed by sand, Lyra knew this wasn't decorative magic. The wards hummed with living enchantments, old ones, layered like sediment, wrapped around something the earth itself wanted hidden. That should have been her first warning. The tomb's entrance was sealed by rune locks she didn't recognize. Not Coptic, not Sumerian, not even Atlantean. They curled like serpents, moving when she blinked. Every protective spell she cast shimmered, then faded. Whatever magic was here, it didn't want her protection. She should have walked away, but Lyra Vance didn't crave attention. She craved answers. So she raised her wand, whispered a spell of unbinding, and the air itself tore open. Pain exploded through her chest like a broken seal. She collapsed, light bursting beneath her skin. Symbols, runes, burned into her arms in a language she didn't know. A scream clawed its way up her throat, but no sound came. Her heartbeat stuttered, and just like that it stopped. For exactly 6 seconds, then came back, altered, slower, colder. And in the dead silence of the desert night, the runes on the tomb rearranged themselves. They now spelled a name. Tom Marvolo Riddle. Half a world away, in a ministry archive vault, a locked parchment burst into flame, revealing a single phrase in black ink before vanishing. The inheritance has begun. The morning after the incident, Lyra awoke in her tent as if nothing had happened. The wind whispered through the dunes. Her tea was still cold beside her cot. For a moment she convinced herself it had been a hallucination, a magical backlash maybe. She'd pushed a tomb's wards too far. She was tired, sunbaked, dehydrated. Maybe the name she saw wasn't real. But then she rolled up her sleeves and saw the runes. Thin, black and sharp, they coiled faintly across her forearms like scars inked beneath the skin. They hadn't been there yesterday. They weren't painted or cursed or carved. They were part of her now, etched into the magic inside her blood. When she whispered a basic revelare, the marks lit up like fresh lightning. She muttered, "That's new." Still, she refused to panic. Lyra Vance didn't panic. She documented. She studied. She understood. So she took out her journal. She copied the runes. She tried translating them. No lexicon matched. Not ancient runes, not the obscure Gaunt family scripts, not even the lost tongues of Oclaria she'd spent a year researching. These weren't part of any written magical language. They were a magical signature, and they matched another set she'd seen only once, hidden in a blackened memory file at the Department of Mysteries. A trace left behind on a splintered wand recovered from a battlefield in 1998. Lyra had been 18, still an unspeakable intern at the time. Curious, reckless. She'd been warned never to touch it. Of course she had. That magical residue had felt cold, coiled, immense, hungry, and somehow impossibly familiar. Now, staring at her arms, she felt the same pressure. That same slow-turning awareness building in the back of her mind. Like a door had cracked open inside her, and something on the other side had noticed. Back in London, chaos bloomed beneath the polished floors of the ministry. In the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Head Aura Syra Pruitt paced a narrow hallway while 3 internal memos flew in frantic circles above her. "Just say it," she snapped. "He's back, isn't he?" Her assistant, a former Slytherin named Callum Montjoy, shook his head. No, ma'am. He's not back. But something is active. Something ancient. The spells are all keyed to his magical frequency. It's not resurrection. Then what is it? Callum hesitated. Inheritance. Syra narrowed her eyes. From who to who? Another pause. We don't know yet, but the signature matches someone. Living, female, late 20s. Magical ID trace puts her in northern Egypt. Sarah stopped pacing. Get me everything you have on her. Back in the desert, Lyra's wand moved before she did. A whisper, a flick. A stone glyph on the tomb wall twisted open, revealing a hidden chamber she hadn't detected before. Inside, a stone table, perfectly smooth, and a single object sitting at its centre. A wand. It was made of something dark and ancient, not wood. Bone, maybe. Obsidian. It hummed when she stepped near, and the moment she touched it, every rune on her arms blazed to life. She saw flashes. A boy in a cave speaking to a snake. A diary full of lies. A girl crying as she cast her first Cruciatus curse. A man smiling as a phoenix burned above him. Then she heard a voice, not from the wand, not from the room, but from within her own magic. Welcome, inheritor. Lyra didn't tell anyone about the wand. She didn't log it in the site report. She didn't send word to the collector. She didn't even sketch it in her journal. She simply packed it into her satchel, wrapped in enchanted cloth, warded twice over, and tried to pretend it wasn't pulsing like a second heartbeat every time she got near it. That night her dreams burned. She saw runes falling like rain, saw snakes coiling through flames, saw a black castle without windows, built entirely from books and bone. At the centre stood a boy, not Voldemort, not Tom Riddle, but a ghost made of both. He turned to face her, eyes glowing white. You're not me, he whispered. But you could be. She woke at dawn, heart racing, hand gripping her wand, her real one. Not the thing in her bag. She had to leave Egypt. Now, meanwhile, deep in the restricted archives of the British Ministry, a man named Tiber Crane pored over the burn marks left behind by the activation scroll. His hands were ink-stained, his spectacles fogged from hours in the candlelit vault. He wasn't an aura. He wasn't even in magical law enforcement. He was something far more dangerous. A magical archivist. Crane was the Ministry's historian of dangerous magic, obsessed with tracking traces of spells long outlawed or erased. Voldemort had always fascinated him. Not for his cruelty, but for his technique. Now, for the first time in decades, the dead man's magical signature had flared back to life. And this time, it hadn't just activated old traps or sent hidden messages. It had rewritten a law, specifically Section 41 of the Magical Inheritance Act, an obscure clause dealing with spiritual succession and legacy-bound enchantments. The words on the parchment had physically changed. They now included a name, Lyra Vance, and beside it the mark of magical concordance, a 1 in a billion match rate. A match not of blood, not of mind, but of core magic. Crane's eyes widened. Oh, it worked! Lyra arrived in London 2 days later. She didn't go home. She didn't check in with the ministry registry. She went instead to an old friend, a former Ravenclaw classmate named Elias Rowe, who now worked as a spellweaver in Nocturne Alley. He dealt in the kind of magical diagnostics the ministry didn't like. Unregistered core mapping, legacy resonance, soul patterning. Scan me, she said, dropping a pouch of galleons onto the table. Don't ask questions. Elias raised an eyebrow but obeyed. He took her wand, then her pulse, then her magical frequency using a silver thread woven through old blood rituals and astral projection formulas. When it finished, the thread turned green and hissed. Elias stepped back like she'd struck him. Lyra, this isn't yours. She stared at the thread. What do you mean? This frequency, these markers. The spell signature, it's ancient, violent, hungry. I've only seen one like it before. Where? He hesitated. In my father's ward journal. During the siege of Hogwarts. He wrote that when he who must not be named cast magic, it didn't feel like a spell. It felt like the spell was watching you back. Lyra's voice was quiet. And now I'm the one being watched. Back in the ministry, the Order's last surviving intelligence ring gathered in silence. Neville Longbottom leaned across the table. We need to find her. Jinny Weasley, now head of magical catastrophes, nodded. We're too late for that. A second parchment lit up in red fire on the table between them. It read, Inheritance Phase 2, Integration has begun. The first time Lyra spoke Parseltongue, it was by accident. She didn't even realise she was doing it. Not until the glass terrarium in Elias's back room cracked with a shriek, and the small green adder inside pressed its face to the glass and whispered back. You're not him, it hissed. But you smell like him. Lyra dropped the glass vial in her hand. It shattered across the stone floor. Her heartbeat turned to thunder in her ears. "What did I just say?" she asked Elias. He stared at her like he'd never seen her before. "You told it to stop watching you." "But I don't speak." "You do now." They stood there, frozen in the quiet. Lyra's wand trembled in her fingers. The air around her felt wrong, too thick, too electric. Something in her magic had shifted again, pulled another thread loose from some buried source. This wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. Every day since she touched the wand in the tomb, a new piece of Voldemort's magic was surfacing inside her. Not copied, not possessed, integrated, as if her body were adapting, reforming itself into something more compatible with his legacy. It wasn't possession. It was inheritance. And it was accelerating. Across the city, Sarah Pruitt read the Order's internal dossier with growing unease. Lyra Vance, brilliant, private, no criminal record. Independent contractor for the Department of Mysteries. Multiple field commendations, no known family alive. But what troubled Sarah most wasn't Lyra's magical skill. It was a sealed line in her Hogwarts file. A classified note, written by Professor Flitwick himself in faded ink. Unregistered magical anomalies began appearing in her 6th year, core instincts surpassing conscious control. Suggested evaluation, suppressed resonance disorder, denied. The date matched the year Voldemort fell. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Lyra hadn't been infected by Voldemort's magic. She'd been compatible with it since she was 17. That evening, Lyra returned to her flat for the first time in weeks. The moment she crossed the threshold, her wards reacted. Not sluggishly, as they usually did after weeks of neglect, but sharply, aggressively. Her own protection spells hissed as if resisting her presence. A mirror on the wall cracked in its frame as she passed. The shadows in her room clung a little too long to her footsteps. She lit a candle with a flick of her wand, and it burst into green flame. She sat at her writing desk, breathing slowly, staring at her hands. She'd always thought of her magic as a tool, neutral, measured, something she controlled. Now it felt like a presence. Watching, learning, adjusting to her skin like a second soul slipping into place. She stood and faced the mirror. What stared back wasn't different, but it didn't feel entirely hers. Same eyes, same face. But behind them, something shimmered faintly. A flicker of depth, like a memory not hers caught behind the glass. She whispered, "What are you?" And the mirror replied, not in her voice, not in any voice, but in an echo that rattled the walls. "I am what's left." Deep below the ministry, in a warded interrogation room, an aura screamed as the dark mark on his forearm twisted itself into a new shape, a rune unfamiliar to him but etched in fire. It pulsed once, then vanished. The curse inside him did not. Lyra stood over the broken mirror long after its voice faded. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the shards, waiting for the echo to return. It didn't, but something else did. Her left hand began to twitch, not from nerves, but from heat. The runes on her arms were glowing again, faint but steady, like embers in her skin. She touched them, half expecting pain. There was none. Only the cold sensation of being read, like something beyond the veil of magic was learning her through these marks. Lyra pulled her sleeves down. She needed answers, and there was only one place left that might have them. Nocturne Alley at midnight wasn't a place for questions. It was a place for secrets. She passed cloaked figures and closed stalls, whispering doorways and shops with no names, heading to the one entrance that wasn't on any official map. The map of ashes. It wasn't a store. It wasn't even a space, really. It was a shifting magical archive built entirely from burnt magical documents, the fragments that refused to die. Rumours said the map collected what the world tried to erase. To enter, you didn't knock. You bled. Lyra pressed a knife to her palm, let a few drops fall onto a blank brick wall. The bricks recoiled like muscle, then opened. Inside, parchment rustled without wind. Ink floated midair like smoke. There were no librarians. Only the map itself, an ancient sentient spell woven into burnt scrolls, constantly rewriting its contents from the whispers of forgotten magic. Lyra didn't speak. She simply stepped forward, let her runes glow, and waited. The map responded. Scrolls peeled away from shelves. Ash drifted into shape. And in seconds before her, the fragments began assembling, spelling out a name. Riddle, Tom Marvolo. Then another, Vance, Lyra Alice. And finally a line that made her blood stop cold. Magical concordance achieved, 97.4% resonance. Spell, Inheritance Clause 115B. Trigger, activation by descent of instinctive core signatures. Descent? Lyra whispered. No, He didn't have children, but the map disagreed. Another scroll unfurled, scorched black along the edges. It showed a bloodline tree, but instead of branches, it showed resonant strands. Threads of magical compatibility, legacy echoes. And her name was woven into his like a tether, not by blood but by magical design. The inheritance wasn't about flesh, it was about fit. Elsewhere, Sarah Pruitt stood before the Wizengamot, presenting her emergency findings. "We're not facing possession," she said. "We're facing conversion. A magical adaptation protocol seeded into the ley lines of Britain. Voldemort didn't plan to return by soul or by spell. He planned to return by shaping the very nature of magic to find someone who fit his power, someone magic itself would evolve." The room went still. The chief warlock leaned forward. "You're saying Miss Vance is not the next Dark Lord by choice?" "I'm saying," Syra said coldly, "she might not have a choice at all." Back in the archive, Lyra's magic began to rise. The walls pulsed. The scrolls hissed. The map reacted to her presence, not as an intruder but as command. And in its centre, a door appeared, one that had never opened for anyone. At its base, a message in perfect inked runes: "Only the inheritor may pass." Lyra stepped forward and walked through. The door in the map of ashes led to no corridor, no stairwell, no space that could exist inside Nocturne Alley or anywhere in London. Lyra stepped through and found herself standing in a chamber of void. There were no walls, no sky, no floor. Only shadow and silence, held together by faint lines of magic etched across the blackness like constellations in reverse. The runes on her arms pulsed in sync with the space. Every breath she took echoed like a spell being cast. And at the centre, suspended in nothingness, was a book. It didn't sit on a pedestal or float by charm. It simply was, like it had always been there, waiting. Bound in serpent-scale leather, locked by silver clasps shaped like fangs, and sealed with a mark Lyra recognised instantly. Not the dark mark, but the symbol Voldemort used before he became Voldemort, a sigil formed from the letters of his name rearranged and twisted into something arcane. She stepped toward it. The book opened without touch. Its pages were blank at first. Then slowly, ink began bleeding upward from the paper, forming symbols, diagrams, phrases in a dozen languages. Some lost to history, others never meant to be read by human eyes. A whisper filled the chamber. "This is not a record. This is a blueprint." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "For what?" "For transformation." The voice wasn't Voldemort's. It wasn't hers. It was something in between. A spectral echo of intent. A magical construct with only one purpose: to pass on knowledge Voldemort had never dared to share in life. On the second page she saw it. Phase 1, selection. Phase 2, integration. Phase 3, alignment. Phase 4, revelation. She was halfway through the process. The next page was worse. Phase 3, alignment required the voluntary sacrifice of previous self-concept. In simpler words, she'd have to choose whether to keep being Lyra Vance or accept the metamorphosis and become something new. She stepped back, breath catching. "No," she said aloud. "I didn't ask for this. I'm not part of this." The chamber trembled. The runes on her arms burned white hot. "But you fit, Lyra," the voice whispered. "You always did." Back in the ministry, Crane stormed into Syra's office without knocking. She passed through the map. Syra's head snapped up. "That's impossible." "No one's ever triggered the archive gate before," Crane said. "Not even Dumbledore." "What's on the other side?" "I don't know. That's the point. It was designed by magic itself, hidden from time, protected by spells no wizard ever wrote." "Then we need to get her out of there." Crane didn't respond. Syra leaned forward. "Don't we?" He adjusted his glasses, voice quiet. "Or we wait and see what she becomes." In the chamber without time, Lyra turned the final page. It wasn't blank. It was a mirror, inked in silver. Her reflection stared back at her, but her eyes glowed faintly green. Her expression was not entirely hers. The mirror rippled, and the voice spoke one last time. "Step forward, inheritor. Choose what comes next." Lyra stood before the mirror, inked into the final page. Her reflection blinked in time with her, but it wasn't mimicry. It was anticipation. Like the figure behind the glass was waiting for her to do something, to finally accept something she wasn't ready to name. The green glow in her reflection's eyes pulsed once. So did the runes on her arms. She clenched her fists. "This isn't me." But even as she said it, she felt her magic react, not in protest, but in curiosity, like it wasn't so sure anymore. The chamber began to shift. The blackness folded inward, lines of ancient starlit runes forming a spiralling corridor beneath her feet, one that led downward, deeper, into something older than the room itself. The path was made entirely of light, and it pulsed green. The green path. Lyra didn't move, until the air behind her grew cold. She turned. Her reflection had stepped out of the page, but it wasn't her anymore. It was a ghost of Tom Riddle, young, handsome, unreadable. No robes, no wand, no smile. Just shadow and memory wrapped in the form he wore before he called himself Lord Voldemort. "I never expected it to be you," he said softly. "But magic did." Lyra's voice caught in her throat. "You're not real." He shrugged. "Neither is legacy. And yet here we are." She raised her wand, uncertain whether she meant to defend or destroy. "What is this?" "A memory. A blueprint. A whisper in the spell you activated. I'm not the Dark Lord. I'm the idea he left behind." He stepped toward her. His eyes were calm, dispassionate, almost sad. "Do you know why I failed?" he asked. "Because you were a monster," she spat. He smiled faintly. "No. I failed because I tried to force magic to serve me. You." He gestured to the runes on her arms. "You're letting it change you. That's the difference." "I'm not letting it do anything." "But you haven't stopped it." That silenced her. Riddle tilted his head. "There's one truth I learnt too late. Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals. If you follow this path, Lyra, it won't make you me. It will make you more of you. Are you ready to see what that really means?" She stared at him, then down at the glowing path of green light, and finally at the open page behind him, where her reflection still waited, no longer smiling. "I don't want to be anyone's inheritor," she whispered. "Then don't inherit," he said. "Transform." Outside the chamber, the world shuddered. Across magical Britain, spells misfired. Wards twisted. Portraits whispered in voices that didn't belong to them. Something ancient and unfinished was aligning itself with the present. Syra Pruitt stood on the ministry's rooftop as auras scrambled below. She didn't need a prophecy to know what was happening. "She's not becoming Voldemort," she muttered. "She's becoming something else." Lyra stepped forward, onto the green path, and vanished into the dark. The green path led nowhere and everywhere. Lyra moved through it like drifting through memory. There were no walls, no sky, no ground beneath her feet, only pulses of magic and shifting images stitched from light. Moments she'd forgotten, spells she hadn't meant to cast. A vision of herself at 17, staring down a Dementor during training, her wand steady while older witches ran. She didn't remember being brave, but magic did. The deeper she walked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a journey through space. It was a ritual, a magical reckoning. The spell Voldemort left behind wasn't meant to control her. It was designed to test her, and she was passing, too easily. Meanwhile, in a shuttered wing of St. Mungo's, an unmarked ward pulsed with protective enchantments. Inside, 5 witches and wizards sat around a floating projection of Britain's ley lines. Every single line was glowing faintly green. "This isn't just an echo," said the lead seer, her voice tight. "This is active alignment. Legacy resonance at a national scale. She's not inheriting a person, she's syncing with an era." Another seer leaned forward. "We need to initiate the Scala's protocol." The others went still. That protocol hadn't been mentioned in decades, not since the days when the Ministry feared ideological contagion, when Voldemort's influence was treated like a virus more than a man. The lead seer finally nodded. "Notify the War Archive. The Scarlet War begins tonight." Back in the void, Lyra reached the end of the path. It didn't lead to revelation. It led to a door. Wooden. Carved. Cracked down the centre like it had been struck by lightning. There was no handle. No keyhole. Just a whisper carved along the top in an ancient runic dialect. "You do not open this door. You decide whether to deserve it." She stared at the inscription, then at the flickering green light around her, then at her hand, still marked with runes that no longer felt foreign. In the space between her thoughts, something spoke again, not with words but with emotion. Resolve, clarity, power. And the moment she chose to accept the spell, not surrender, not obey, but acknowledge its purpose, the door opened. What lay beyond wasn't Voldemort's lair or a secret weapon. It was a library, or at least what was left of one. Ruined shelves, ashes, charred parchment caught mid-air in anti-gravity stasis. But in the centre, untouched, stood a table, and atop it a simple stone plate etched with one phrase. The final Horcrux was never a person, it was a spell. Neville Longbottom slammed a fist into the war table. "She's walking into a trap." "She is the trap," Jinny countered. "You think she'll let this thing consume her? You don't know her." Neville frowned. "And you do. She's not like us. Jinny said quietly. And that might be exactly what we need. Inside the library, Lyra reached for the stone plate. As her fingers brushed the surface, the ash in the room surged like smoke caught in wind. It wrapped around her shoulders, then her wrists, then her throat, but gently, like armour being formed rather than a curse being cast. And she heard one final line before the room went dark. The war you feared is not coming. It is already here, and you are its only constant. The moment the ash settled over Lyra's shoulders, she felt it. Not as weight, but as recognition, like magic itself had acknowledged her. Not as a puppet, not as a threat, but as a fixed point in a world already breaking apart. The runes on her arms locked into a new pattern, no longer swirling or shifting. Solid. Final. She wasn't changing anymore. She had changed. And when the darkness lifted, the ruined library was gone. She stood in a city. Not London. Not any city she'd seen before. This one was made of memories, flickering images of places Voldemort had haunted. The orphanage, the cave, the Chamber of Secrets, Malfoy Manor. They weren't connected by roads but by threads of magic, weaving the past into something present. A mental landscape, a final safeguard, the innermost core of the inheritance spell, and she had reached it. In the real world, the magical government had fractured. The Wizengamot held emergency votes behind closed doors. Half the Aura Corps went dark, refusing to act without clearer orders. Rogue factions within the Department of Mysteries released decades-old contingency spells, designed to activate if Voldemort ever returned. Only now they weren't targeting him. They were targeting her. Sarah Pruitt watched from the rooftop of the Ministry, her fingers clenched around a sealed black envelope. Inside it, the order to detain Lyra Vance, by any means necessary. She hadn't opened it. Not yet. Instead, she turned her eyes toward the horizon. I don't think we're supposed to stop her, she murmured. I think we're supposed to follow her. Back inside the memory city, Lyra walked. Each step through the landscape triggered new echoes, flashes of Tom Riddle's life. Not scenes she hadn't seen before, but perspectives he had buried. Fear, regret, curiosity, even love, twisted into shapes he couldn't understand. These weren't memories built to glorify him. They were built to warn her. At the centre of the city stood a massive archway, cracked, cold, humming with magic old enough to precede wand lore itself. A version of the Veil, perhaps, or something worse. As Lyra approached, the city began to collapse behind her. Streets turned to sand. Walls fell into shadow. The inheritance spell was ending its cycle, collapsing the final layer of its design, because it had passed judgment. And the message was clear. She was the constant. Not a clone, not a rebirth, not a weapon. The spell had searched through decades of magical bloodlines, core frequencies and intent. And from all of it, it had chosen her. Not because she could continue Voldemort's work, but because she was the only one who could choose not to. At that exact moment, thousands of wizards across Britain looked up as a shiver passed through the air, like a new magical season had begun. Some dropped wands, some clutched their arms, some fell to their knees without knowing why. In Nocturne Alley, Elias Rowe whispered, "She's done it." In Hogwarts, the Sorting Hat trembled for the first time in years, and in Azkaban, a prisoner screamed as the dark mark burned off his arm in silence. Lyra stepped through the archway and disappeared into the storm of green light that had been waiting for her since the day she was born. Lyra awoke in her flat with no memory of how she got there. Her robes were dusted in ash. Her palms were unmarked but tingling. Her wand, her real wand, lay snapped in two on the desk across the room. The air shimmered with static, like a spell had just been cast but hadn't finished echoing. She sat up slowly, heart pounding. Something had changed. She reached for the broken wand, her fingers trembling. It didn't react, not with light, not with resistance, not even heat. It was dead. Not broken like any wand she'd ever seen, but hollowed out, like her magic no longer had a place inside it. She whispered a basic charm with the halves in hand. Nothing. Then she raised her hand, wandless, and thought the spell. The lamp above her flared to life in a burst of green. Across London, magical instruments shorted. Spell detectors failed. Every wand in the Aura headquarters sparked once and dimmed. And in the Department of Mysteries, a black quill that had not moved in 20 years began to write a single line, again and again. Constant located. Constant changed. Elias Rowe barged into her flat 20 minutes later. He didn't knock. "Lyra, what happened?" he asked, breathless. "You dropped off the trace grid for 42 hours. Every surveillance charm you've ever touched went cold. Your magical signature, it's rewritten." She looked up at him, eyes tired but calm. "I think I died," she said. "Or a version of me did." He sat across from her, stunned. She explained what she remembered. The path, the mirror, the city of memory, the final archway. The library. The plate. The words. Elias listened, pale. You said the last Horcrux wasn't a person, he muttered. But a spell? She nodded. A ritual cast across time. And I wasn't the vessel. I was the filter. Elias blinked. A filter for what? Her voice dropped. For legacy. Elsewhere in the Ministry's war archive, the remaining members of the Scarless Protocol met in silence. She's aligned, said one, but not possessed. She's not Voldemort, said another. She's something new. Magic has never chosen a constant before. We don't know what that means. A vote was called. Should Lyra Vance be contained? The motion failed. Barely. At sunset, Lyra stood at the riverbank beneath Blackfriars Bridge, staring into the water. She held the two halves of her wand. Then slowly she let them fall. The current carried them away. Magic had moved on. So would she. But in the reflection on the water, she no longer saw only herself. She saw every spell she'd ever cast. And now she could feel every spell waiting to be born. The Order of the Phoenix had never formally disbanded. After Voldemort fell, its core members scattered, some into retirement, others into bureaucracy. But the name, the mission, the fire behind it remained. Hidden, sleeping, watching. Now, for the first time in decades, the emergency summons activated. 5 enchanted coins, left forgotten in drawers, vaults, or beneath floorboards, burned with the same word etched in flame. Constant. Neville Longbottom arrived first. He walked into the stone-walled chamber beneath the old Hogsmeade safehouse with slow, careful steps. He hadn't worn his war robes in years. The sword of Gryffindor no longer hung at his side, but he carried the memory of its weight. Jinny Weasley followed. Tired eyes. A scar across her jaw. She had seen too many battles between peace and politics, and she had never been satisfied with the line between the two. Then came Kingsley Shacklebolt, then Hannah Abbott, then Lee Jordan, who hadn't fought since the Battle of Hogwarts, but had never stopped broadcasting underground resistance spells in secret. They sat in silence until Jinny spoke. It's her, Lyra Vance. Neville leaned forward. You're sure? Jinny nodded. I felt it. Every witch and wizard with a connection to the last war felt it. The air shifted. The balance of magic realigned. Lee frowned. So what now? Is she one of us, or is she the next Voldemort? Kingsley answered with a deep sigh. That's the wrong question. The better one is, what will everyone else choose to believe? Lyra had no idea the Order was gathering. She was halfway across the country, walking the forgotten paths of Yorkshire, roads once carved by ley lines and battle scars. She could feel them now. The threads of magic beneath the land pulsing faintly like the beat of a giant buried heart. It wasn't her power, but it recognized her. And when she raised a hand to the sky, storm clouds shifted around her fingertips, not summoned, but aligned, as if nature was adjusting to her intent without waiting for her to speak. She sat beneath an old yew tree and tried to remember what normal magic felt like. She couldn't. Back in the safe house, the Order argued deep into the night. Some believed Lyra was a product of Voldemort's final curse. Others believed she was a new kind of guardian, chosen not by prophecy, but by magic's own will. Neville remained silent until the end. Then finally he stood. When I killed Nagini, I felt his presence die, he said. But the fear he created, that never left. It shaped our laws, our politics, our trust in each other. That fear is what's waking up now. Not just because of Lyra, but because she might undo it. Jinny glanced up. Undo it how? Neville's voice dropped. By proving we never needed to be afraid in the first place. Far away, Lyra opened her eyes. The runes on her skin glowed in rhythm with the wind. She didn't know yet that war was coming again. But this time, it would be fought not with curses or creatures, but with belief. The Ministry of Magic had not officially declared a state of emergency. Not yet. But anyone walking its halls that week could feel the shift. The fountains whispered. The walls watched. The enchanted lifts no longer played music. Departments sent memos in triplicate, and nobody trusted a message that wasn't physically hand-delivered. Fear didn't arrive with a bang, it leaked in like fog. At the heart of it, one name kept surfacing, Lyra Vance. Some called her the Constant, others a magical aberration. A few whispered the unthinkable, the second coming of Voldemort. But no one said it in daylight. Instead, they waited for the Chief Enforcer's report. Syra Pruitt stood in the centre of Courtroom 10, facing the Wizengamot in their faded purple robes. Not since the trial of Bellatrix Lestrange had this many senior magical officials gathered in silence. I won't waste your time, Syra began. The woman known as Lyra Vance was exposed to a spell of ancient legacy design. Its origin is Voldemort, but its mechanism is older, possibly primordial. It did not possess her. It selected her. Murmurs stirred. Selected her for what? Asked an older wizard near the edge. Syra didn't hesitate. To become the constant, magic's new anchor, a role that Voldemort believed he could manipulate. But he failed. She did not. More whispers. Uneasy. And what does that mean for us? Someone else asked. Syra looked up, her voice calm. It means we no longer understand who controls the rules of magic. Outside the courtroom, Tiber Crane watched from behind a security veil, eyes narrowed behind his glasses. He had seen the scans. Read the ley shifts. Cross-referenced the symbols burned into Lyra's skin. And something didn't add up. It wasn't just that Lyra's magic had changed. Magic itself was changing in response to her. Crane had once believed Voldemort's greatest achievement was his mastery of death. He now saw he had been wrong. Voldemort's greatest act was attempting to outlive history, and Lyra Vance had accidentally become the spell that worked. That night, Lyra stood at the edge of a cliff in Dover, wind tearing at her robes, magic rippling in her skin. She had heard the rumours, that the Ministry might try to detain her, that auras had been ordered to track her, that public trust in the magical world was unravelling around her footsteps. She didn't care, because every time she closed her eyes she saw it again, the book in the void, the echo of Riddle's voice, the plate that whispered of a war with no scars, only choices. She didn't want power. She wanted freedom, from the fear that had infected magic itself. So she whispered a spell. No wand, no incantation, just will. And across the sea, dozens of old protection charms, wards left by Voldemort in secret, shattered into green mist. In the Ministry, every detection instrument went blind for 30 seconds. No one said anything. But now, no one could say nothing. The parchment was sealed in midnight wax, engraved with the seal of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. It was delivered not by owl, but by unspeakable courier, hooded, silent, wandless. Inside 6 names, all elite, all trusted, all bound by the detainer's oath. At the top of the list, Aura Silas Thorne, a man who never failed a mission, a man who had already lost a sister to Voldemort's war, and a man who didn't believe in prophecy, magic-fated heirs, or dangerous mercy. He read the assignment twice, then burned it with a snap of his fingers, not in protest, in finality. The detainer's oath wasn't just a job. It was a magical contract issued only in emergencies, when the Ministry believed a single individual posed a threat too great for due process. The oath didn't call for trial. It called for containment at any cost. The 6 were given no backup, no press coverage, no oversight. Only a name, a trace, and a timeline. 72 hours to bring in Lyra Vance, dead if necessary. Meanwhile, Lyra had returned to the ruins of her childhood home in Lancashire. She hadn't been there in years. The cottage was little more than bones now. Charred beams, shattered glass, weeds bursting through cracked floorboards. She walked through it slowly, memory overlapping reality. Her father's desk in the corner, her mother's charm books by the window, her own drawings still faint on the scorched wall. But it wasn't nostalgia that drew her back. It was instinct. This place was the first site where her magic had ever misfired. She was 9. She had screamed in a nightmare, and every mirror in the house had shattered inward, not outward. A pull of magic that moved against the laws she would later study at Hogwarts. She had buried that memory. Now she let it rise. And as it did, something stirred beneath the foundation. A soft hum. A buried rune. A fail-safe, left there not by her, but by the inheritance itself, using her own past as anchor. She placed her palm to the ground, and the world opened beneath her. Elsewhere, Aura Silas Thorne moved through shadows, silent and swift. His team was already en route. He didn't hate Lyra. He didn't even fear her. He simply believed that no one, not even the brilliant, soft-spoken Lyra Vance, could be trusted with a spell that made magic itself bend to her will. It wasn't personal. It was war. Back in the hidden chamber beneath the ruins, Lyra stepped into light. Not white, green. It pulsed from the walls, a heartbeat matching her own, and written across the ceiling in inkless rune light, the constant cannot be caged. They came for her at dawn. No warning, no declaration. Just 6 cloaked figures, slipping through the broken forest that surrounded the ruins of Lyra's childhood home. They moved like a single spell, silent and precise, wands drawn but not raised, yet. Aura Silas Thorne led them. He was not nervous. He had faced dark wizards, inferi, basilisk remnants. But even now, even as his boots touched the moss-covered stones near the cottage, something in his blood told him they were wrong to be here. Not because of danger, because of scale. Magic shouldn't hum this loud before a duel begins. Lyra stood in the lower chamber, breathing in rhythm with the pulse of green light echoing through the stones. She felt them the moment they crossed the perimeter, like thunder before a storm. Not through wards, through her. She rose. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She walked up the stone steps and emerged through the warped floorboards, stepping into the grey light of morning with her arms at her sides. No wand. No shield. Just her. Thorn was the first to spot her. He raised a hand, halting the others. Lyra Vance, he said, clear and calm. You are hereby ordered to surrender under Article 12 of the Detainer's Oath. Lyra tilted her head. Did I commit a crime? That's not for you to decide. And yet, she said quietly, I seem to be the only one being judged. Silas didn't respond. The air between them crackled. Then one of the detainers acted. Too fast. Too nervous. A binding hex flared from their wand, streaking toward Lyra like a lash of white lightning. It never reached her. It dissolved mid-air, frozen, unravelled, turned to dust, not blocked, not deflected, simply unmade. Silas didn't blink. Stand down, he snapped, but it was too late. The others moved. Spells fired. The air lit with a dozen bursts of blue, red, green, then went silent. Every spell stopped mid-flight and hovered. Lyra's eyes glowed faintly, softly. Then she closed her hand. And the spells reversed course, spiralling backward, slow and deliberate, slamming into the ground at their caster's feet with explosive force. None of the detainers were killed, but none were left standing. Silas remained. He hadn't raised his wand. He looked at her, calm. What are you? He asked. Lyra stepped closer. I'm not Voldemort, she said. I'm not a weapon. I'm not what they fear. Then what? I'm the part of magic they tried to forget. The part that doesn't follow rules. The part that decides. She turned away. Tell the Ministry, she said. Next time don't send blades into a storm. That night the Wizengamot met again. The motion to declare Lyra a level 1 magical threat passed by one vote. Silas didn't cast his. He was still staring at the dust on his boots, remembering how it felt when magic looked at him like it was disappointed. In the shadows of the forbidden forest beneath the gnarled roots of a tree older than Hogwarts itself, a gathering took place. 7 figures stood in a ring, none of them masked, none of them afraid. They didn't fear the Ministry or the Order or even Lyra Vance. They were known only as the Root, an underground magical philosophy cult born from the ashes of Voldemort's defeat. Not loyal to him, not blinded by his failures, but obsessed with what he almost proved. That magic is not equal, that some wield it, and some become it. The Root didn't want Lyra destroyed. They wanted her to lead. At the centre of their circle stood a woman named Malis Greengrass. Pureblood, former Ravenclaw, disowned daughter of an old family that once sat silently through a war. Now she wore no house colours, only robes the colour of forest dusk and a circlet etched with runes that pulsed green. She raised her hand. She is awakened, she said to the others, and now the world fears her. The others nodded. Let them, Malis smiled. We are not here to worship her. We are here to follow her lead before she even knows she is leading. Meanwhile, Lyra felt something shift in the magical current again. Not pressure, not threat, but attention. Something was watching her, not hostile but hungry, curious. She was sitting in the ruins of a chapel near Devon, tracing patterns in the stone floor where old protective spells had once been carved. Her magic responded like a compass pulled off true north, pointing to a new source of gravity. Not the Ministry, not the Order. Something else. A message appeared in flame on the far wall, etched in runes she hadn't seen since the void. Come to the roots, beneath the stone. Magic remembers its own. Back in the Ministry, Tiber Crane reviewed the detainer's battle report. She reversed castings mid-flight, he read aloud. Nullified intention, rewrote trajectory. He looked up at Sarah Pruitt, who hadn't slept in days. She's not casting spells anymore, he whispered. She's rewriting them. Sarah stared out the window. We built our world on the assumption that magic must be learned, controlled, measured, and she breaks that assumption just by breathing. Tiber looked back at the report. Then the world we built won't survive her. Lyra followed the pull of magic through forest and ruin, led by instinct more than direction. The deeper she walked, the more nature seemed to yield, branches bending, roots parting, birds silent. And then she found it. A clearing perfectly round, where 7 people waited beneath the twisting boughs of a yew tree. She didn't speak. Neither did they. Only Malis stepped forward and offered her hand, not in friendship, not in warning, but in recognition. We don't serve you, Malis said softly, but we're ready to follow. Lyra looked at the runes on her palm, then at the world behind her, already fracturing, and without a word she stepped into the circle. The Order of the Phoenix had always sworn to protect magic's future, but now no one could agree what that future was. Inside the candlelit war room beneath Hogsmeade, the silence was thick enough to suffocate. Jinny paced the edge of the table. Neville stood with arms crossed. Hannah Abbott flipped through the latest surveillance reports, while Lee Jordan poured fire whiskey he hadn't touched since the Battle of Hogwarts. "She didn't kill them," Jinny said for the third time. Neville didn't look up. She didn't have to. That's the part that scares them. She could have levelled that field. She chose not to. Yet. Hannah closed the file. "What happens when she stops choosing restraint?" No one answered. Lyra sat with Malis Greengrass under the boughs of the yew tree, surrounded by whispers and watching Roots tremble at her presence. The Root had offered her no loyalty oaths, no pledges, just truth. They believed in what she was becoming, and they wanted to be part of it. "Why?" Lyra finally asked. "You don't know what I'll do." Malis smiled faintly. "That's the point. We've lived in fear for decades, fear of return, fear of bloodlines, fear of history. You represent the first thing stronger than that fear. You unwrite it." Lyra said nothing, but deep inside something clicked. Not acceptance, not power, direction. At midnight, Ginny Weasley stood alone beneath the Whomping Willow. She hadn't been here since her 6th year. She drew her wand and held it to the knot in the trunk. The branches froze. She climbed into the secret passage and followed the tunnel all the way to the Shrieking Shack. And there she met him. Tiber Crane. She tossed a folder onto the floor between them. "You win," she said. "You were right. We can't control her." Crane looked up, surprised. "So you're turning her in?" "No," Ginny said. "I'm giving you what you need to trap her." He opened the folder. Inside, a trace pattern of Lyra's magical resonance cycles, gathered in secret from when she'd first returned to England. Ginny's voice was ice. "But you only get one shot. You use it to kill her. I'll burn the ministry down myself." Crane smiled. "Fair enough." Lyra slept that night for the first time in days, but her dreams were no longer her own. She stood in a great hall made of glass, and every pane held a reflection of herself. Hundreds of versions, flickering between futures. Some wore crowns, some bore scars. One stood alone in an empty world of ash. And then, from the far end of the hall, one of the reflections turned and smiled with Voldemort's face. "Still think you're different?" She woke to the sound of earth cracking. The Roots' wards had been breached. Someone was coming. The Roots' forest sanctuary had never been breached. Until now. Lyra stood at the edge of the glade, watching the tree line twist unnaturally inward. Not broken, bent, as if something older than spellwork was folding the space around them. The Roots scrambled to react, conjuring shields and burying sigils into the ground, but Lyra raised a hand and stilled them. "It's not an attack," she said. "It's a test." Far beyond the forest, in the lowest vault beneath the Department of Mysteries, Tiber Crane stood before the mirror of Alethea, the twin to the long-destroyed mirror of Erist. This mirror didn't show desire. It showed truth. Truth not as the mind understood it, but as magic perceived it. They hadn't used it in 40 years. The last time it had driven a seer mad. But Crane didn't need to survive it. He only needed the mirror to focus. He held the parchment Jinny had given him, Lyra's resonance map, and fed it into the enchanted framework. A single phrase burned into the glass. Truth can be forced. In the glade, Lyra felt the air grow heavy. The light bent. Her magic recoiled. This wasn't a spell cast at her, it was one cast through her. Something was trying to pierce the boundaries of who she thought she was. Her memories blurred. Her sense of self frayed. She fell to her knees as her runes burned green gold. And then she was not there anymore. She stood in a white room. At the centre, a mirror. Perfect, tall, waiting. "I don't want to see this," she whispered. The mirror said nothing. She stepped forward and saw herself, but not as she was. This Lyra wore black. Her eyes glowed endlessly. Cities burned behind her. Magic danced around her like flame. She was not cruel, but she was empty. Not a villain. Not a hero. A force. Behind her, Voldemort watched. Not as a presence. As a shadow within her magic. She turned away. But the mirror changed again. Now she saw herself, older. Human. Laughing beside a fire. No glow, no runes. Her magic calm. Her soul intact. No power like Voldemort's, but peace. Back in the forest, Lyra collapsed. Malis rushed forward, catching her. "She's bleeding magic," someone whispered. "What spell is this?" Malis looked up at the sky as green light flickered above the trees like a signal fire. "A mirror spell," she muttered. "But not to show her who she is. To show her what she might become." Inside the mirror of Alethea, Crane smiled. She won't risk becoming him, he told the watching unspeakables. She'll retreat. Break the chain herself. Let the inheritance die with her. Then the mirror cracked. Not shattered, fractured. And from the break, a ripple of magic surged outward, not rejecting the vision but absorbing it, because Lyra wasn't retreating. She was redefining it. Her eyes opened. The runes on her arms were no longer green. They were white, and the truth she had seen, she would not run from it. She would transform it. The forest was silent when Lyra rose. Not just quiet, silent in the way deep magic often is. Even the trees held still, as if listening to something older than wind. The root watched in awe. The runes along Lyra's skin, once burning green with Voldemort's legacy, now glowed white gold, subtle, radiant, alive. Their shapes had changed, no longer snaking or coiling like dark magic, but spiralling in fluid circular patterns. Ancient yet unfamiliar. Even Malis stepped back. "You changed the spell?" she said quietly. "No one's ever done that." Lyra met her gaze. The spell was never fixed. It was waiting to be interpreted. In the ministry, every single scrying pool went black. Wands twitched on their own, and for a full 10 seconds, no one could cast anything, not even a lumos. Then just as suddenly everything returned. But the balance had shifted. Magical law, once hidden, once immutable, had acknowledged a new constant. Jinny Weasley read the Unspeakable's report with a heavy heart. "She didn't break the inheritance," she murmured. "She purified it." Across from her, Neville finally sat down, shoulders heavy. "Then this war isn't about stopping her anymore." "No," Jinny whispered. "It's about whether anyone else can survive the world she's bringing." That night, Lyra stood at the edge of a field where once, long ago, the first Aurors had trained against Grindelwald's followers. The air here was thick with memory. Of fire, blood, spells burned into soil. She raised her hand, and from the ground glowing symbols emerged, not from her, but from the land itself. As if magic had been waiting for a command it trusted. The symbols formed a circle. Not for war, for rebirth. Then a voice broke the stillness. "You know what you are now?" Lyra turned. Sarah Pruitt stood in the shadow of the tree line, wand in hand but not raised. "I know what I'm not," Lyra replied. Sarah stepped forward, slow and steady. "The ministry still wants you detained. Half of them believe you're rewriting magic. The other half think you're rewriting history." "Maybe I am. And if I told you I was here to take you in?" Lyra looked down at the white rune on her palm. "I'd ask if you're really still working for them." Sarah said nothing. Then finally she lowered her wand. "I came to see it, not stop it." She stepped into the glowing circle, and magic didn't reject her. Far below the ministry, in the sealed chamber of failed prophecies, a long dead orb cracked open on its own. The voice inside whispered, "The Dark Lord shall return not in body, but in balance. And she who walks both shadow and flame shall choose whether the world bends or breaks." They said magic had rules. They said magic had... Lyra no longer believed that. Magic had patterns. Magic had memory. But rules? Rules were made by the ones who feared it. Now magic was remembering itself, and it was remembering her. The world bent gently like a wand in steady hands. In France, ancient grimoires unlocked themselves in the Bibliothèque Obscura. In India, a temple once thought to be magically barren erupted in phoenix flame. And in the Americas, thunderbirds migrated east for the first time in 3 centuries. Each event marked on the ley line maps by Unspeakables. Each tethered to the same source, Lyra Vance. But none of them felt like war. They felt like a course correction. Back in the forest, the root had grown silent. Malis Greengrass knelt before Lyra, not in worship, but in realization. "You're not leading a movement," she said. "You're changing the definition of power." Lyra didn't answer, because power had never been the goal. She remembered the mirror, the burned future, the empty self, and the other version, the one that held warmth, laughter, and limit. That was the path she had chosen. The white rune wasn't dominance, it was balance. Jinny Weasley stood before the Wizengamot for the last time. She didn't read from notes. She didn't ask for permission. She spoke like a survivor who had seen too many people mistake fear for control. "We faced one Dark Lord who tried to reshape the world by force, and we stopped him. Now someone has come who reshapes it by being, by aligning with what's always been here. And we're so afraid of losing our grip that we're about to make her our enemy." She paused. "But she's not our enemy. She's our last chance to heal." In Hogwarts, the Sorting Hat trembled. It sang to no one, it sang for itself. When magic bends, it does not break, but tests what parts of us still ache. Beware the fear that clings too tight. The constant rises not by might, and if you seek to cage her flame, then you shall bear the world's true shame. No students heard it, but the castle did. At dusk, Lyra stood atop the cliffs of Tintagel, where waves crashed against ancient stone. The wind howled. She whispered a spell, not aloud, but into the fabric of magic. Not a command, a question. And magic answered, with silence, with stillness, with yielding. A final prophecy shattered in the ministry vaults. Its last breath? The world will not end in fire, it will end in understanding. They offered her a seat at the head of the Wizengamot. They offered her full pardon, a title, her name etched in silver above the Hall of Records. They even offered her the one thing the magical world had never offered anyone before, a voice in rewriting magical law. And still, Lyra said nothing. She stood in the ministry's highest tower, wind catching the edges of her robes. The city stretched below her like a living map. For the first time in generations, magic didn't feel hierarchical. It felt like water returning to a cracked riverbed, flowing freely, realigning what had been dammed for too long. But with that freedom came danger. Old powers were collapsing. The foundations of magical society were built on restraint, control, and fear disguised as order. Now the constant stood outside all of that, and everyone wanted to know what she would do next. You could lead them, Mylis told her, walking the edge of the rooftop beside her. You could rewrite every rule, every barrier. Make magic equal, or make it yours. Lyra didn't respond. You've earned the crown? Lyra looked out at the skyline. I don't want it. Mylis frowned. Then why did you walk the path? Lyra turned. Because I needed to know if I was the only one who could. Below in the ministry's atrium, the gathered crowds buzzed with uncertainty. Witches and wizards of every bloodline, rank and age stood beneath the enchanted ceiling, watching the tower above. Some held signs. Some held silence. Some held hope. All waited for her. Inside, the Wizengamot voted. The motion passed, unanimous. Lyra Vance would be offered magical sovereignty. Not as a ruler, as a living law. A constant by title, by magic, by will. All that remained was her choice. Jinny waited for her in the observatory. Do you want me to tell them? She asked. Lyra stepped to the edge of the platform where words became sky. No, she said, they've heard enough words. She raised her hand. The runes on her arms pulsed white, then dimmed, absorbing into her skin until nothing visible remained. Magic bent around her, not in reverence, but in balance. And then she stepped down. From the tower. From the title. From the crown they tried to place at her feet. She walked back into the crowd. And disappeared. Tiber Crane read the final report in silence. She declined, someone whispered. She walked away. Crane didn't look up. No, he said. She walked forward. Years passed. Not many, but enough. The magical world changed. Not overnight, not with fanfare, but like stones smoothed by river water. Slowly, irrevocably. The ministry restructured. The order disbanded peacefully. The Department of Mysteries rewrote its foundational laws on legacy magic and spiritual resonance. Children learned magic differently now, not as command but as conversation. And the name Lyra Vance? It stopped appearing in newspapers, stopped echoing through policy debates, stopped inspiring fear or awe, but it never truly vanished. Because it didn't have to. She had become the silence that changed things. Some say she wanders. That she teaches in hidden places. That she healed forests scarred by war. That she wrote a spell to unwrite curses, not on parchment, but into the bones of the land itself. Others say she left the magical world entirely, choosing peace in places untouched by wands and politics. But there were signs. Runes blooming white in abandoned battlefields. Magical anomalies settling into harmony instead of chaos. Children born with innate balance in their core signatures. The world did not break. It bent, and in doing so it healed. In a remote glen, Elias Rowe once saw her standing by a stream, her reflection glowing faintly in the water, though no sun touched her face. He didn't call out. He just watched, and smiled, because he knew she had never wanted power. She had wanted understanding. And that had changed everything. In the old chamber beneath the map of ashes, a final rune sealed itself into the stone. One word, etched by magic alone, remains. The inheritance war never ended. Because the inheritance wasn't power. It wasn't fear. It wasn't bloodline. It was the choice to be more than what came before. And someone finally made it.